Alright, hello class. I'm going to put this up on YouTube for you to watch. This will substitute for our class today. It's unfortunate that the power is still not on at BW, but we will use this both on Wednesday and Friday. They will probably end up extending the academic calendar at some point, but anyway, just hope that you're somewhere safe and that nothing happened with the storm. So, and if you do have loved ones or others who were impacted by it, my best to them. Hopefully everything will turn out fine. I have friends and family that were there, and they seem to be okay. Hopefully everything will turn out well and we'll get the power back on at BW, and we'll be back on Monday. So just make sure to keep up with the readings and make sure that you check Blackboard for the second test, as well as a few other announcements I'm going to make before I get to the reading. So, and just be patient with me because I have to fix the camera myself here. So a couple things. First off, the essay grading experiment is due on Friday still, so make sure you do that. If you have any issues with that, make sure to email me and I'll fix it or tell you where you can go. Make sure to paste that link into the address bar, not the search bar. Secondarily, the textbook chapter and the survey that you're going to take for that, I will put that link up on Friday. That will be due the Friday after that. Remember as well, we'll review the second test on November 9th, and the test will be due itself on the 12th. So just make sure everything is in order. That's one of the reasons why I'm doing these classes online, so that way you have the information for your test itself. So, any other announcements? Oh, the reading for Friday is up on Blackboard. It's the ISSP article on environmental values, and I will lecture on that and put that up on YouTube so you can look at it. Make sure to do the reading before you watch the video. Okay, and again, if anybody has any questions about this lecture, and I'll be focusing on some of these notes and put them up here, please let me know after the lecture. So I'll do my best to try and make as much sense as possible and use references to the readings. It'll be hard for you to see the screen. I'm going to go get a whiteboard and do that on Friday, so just bear with me. But hopefully you'll get enough out of this to understand the reading a little bit better, and we will talk about things right now, today, that pertain to some of the stuff you have to do for the test itself. So one of the things we want to talk about today is some of the main differences between the GSS and the census data, as well as the Gallup poll. And I have a few points here, and then we'll get to the readings after this. So one of the main things here, and I'm going to zoom in on the screen, so give me a second. Oops. Alright, so one of the main issues, a few main issues here with the general social surveys, as well as with Gallup, and you see it here with the presidential data. You have these polls that are showing Obama up one day, Romney up the next. Different polls on the same day say different things, different polls in different states saying all this stuff. So obviously one of the major issues is margin of error, and if you use something like a census data or even the general social survey, which interviews a lot more people than just 500 or 700, you either have a very small margin of error or no error at all, or basically minute to the point where it doesn't matter. You're never going to get everybody on a census. It's very difficult to interview and take account of 318 million people, but that's one of the issues here. Also, on top of that, the census versus a poll or a sample, you don't have issues with certain age groups being sampled more than others and misrepresenting their true weight in society. As well as race, gender, regional subgroups. For example, we talked earlier about how people in Wyoming don't get polled that often. You won't have that issue with the census data, so that is a definite advantage for a large-scale census, which is a population versus a sample. Also allows for more definitive correlations with the data. Even with the census that asks somewhat simple and straightforward questions, you can use this data, and you see it in these articles. It's certainly one of the things that was going on in the Living Alone article, this one here. Okay. And then these were based on the census as well, the other two articles that I had to read. This is the one on lifetime earnings. and the other one on healthcare. And those were done, and you see the definitions up there and how they did the data. Those are done with census data using sociological theories or other social science theories, and then trying to prove those theories by looking at independent and dependent variables and looking at large samples of data. And the larger the sample you have, the better and more confident you are usually in correlations. In addition, can be used to confirm the census, that is, can be used to confirm general social survey findings and lead to other models using general social survey data. And you can do what we call, and I'll talk about this later, triangulating data, where you use Gallup and you use the GSS and you use the census, and then you perform your own interviews or a small subset of interviews, all to test a certain hypothesis. And the more data you use and the more methods you use and the more you see confirmation of the correlations between variables, for example living alone and being socially interactive, the more you're confident in the fact that those relationships are actually real and not random, or are more generalizable to the entire population and not just the smaller populations. Some of the limitations with census: it may not be a full population. Like I mentioned, it is very difficult to survey 318 million people. Certainly homeless people get left out. Some neighborhoods they don't go down into. Some people don't fill out the forms, a whole host of things. But in general, the response rate is very high for the census. Limited numbers of questions. The census doesn't ask a lot of the questions that you find on the general social survey about behavior and opinion and the specialized modules. You also don't have anything guided necessarily by sociological theory, whereas some of the questions on the general social survey are based on actual theories and were designed by a social scientist. That's not necessarily the case with the census, but they're still pretty good questions, and they're good questions to use with the general social survey. One of the other issues here, and I didn't mention it here, put it on the slide, but every 10 years the census is done. So there are major shifts that take place over 1 or 2 years, so the census is unable to really capture those smaller intra-decade changes. So that's an issue as well. It's hard to make some correlations because of the issues with the questions. The questions are not necessarily asked in a particular order or with anything in mind, necessarily getting to public opinion. And then, like I mentioned before, does not ask about opinions about sociological subjects or social behavior and a whole host of other things, which, if you had a wider variety of variables, you could make a wider variety of studies looking at different correlations. But the census is not for that anyway. So also, have you seen, it's hard to navigate the website and download data, and if you don't know how to do that, it limits your understanding of some of the things. So, with that in mind, keep that in mind, these issues with the census. More importantly, keep that in mind with the general social survey. Keep that in mind when you're looking at Gallup poll or Pew data or the Huffington Post electoral map or Rasmussen polls. We again will look at these issues of who was the closest with the presidential poll and why and how many people they interviewed. It may just be a sense that one poll got it right just because it got it right, and it was randomly got it right, I mean, and that it would just happen to be that way. We'll see when it comes out. Also, obviously, encourage everybody, even with the electricity out at the school, go out and vote. Go out and vote on Tuesday. Also look up the Ohio Voter Guide to make sure you've seen the ballot issues as well as local races, Ohio Senate race, and on and on. So be informed, go out and vote, and become involved, so that everything, I think it would be an interesting race. We'll look at some of these percentages of votes versus the polling data, and also compare to some of the things that people saw when they went to the polls or felt when they were making up their decision. So we'll get to all of that on Monday, and then obviously more on Wednesday. So everybody, we will talk about the election a little bit more on Monday, but again, come in prepared and come in ready with the reading. Now, let's go on to talk about the New York Times article. And that one was about living alone, and that one used census data. And some of the interesting things here, and then we'll talk about a little bit of the findings. So this article used multiple data sources to expand and verify what the census data suggested. and it used interviews that the author did, and it used other data that other sociologists, one was mentioned from Rutgers, and it used information from the GSS, and it used the census. And what we call that is triangulation, where you try and triangulate your subject from every angle, from every side, so that you know every facet of it and can fully and comprehensively present an explanation or a greater understanding to both the public and the social scientific community. I think even though it was a short article, it did a very good job of that. Additionally, the author took the initial data from the census and used his own interviews and GSS data to show that even though more people lived alone, that these people were more social, meaning they spent more time with family and friends outside of their home, which is an interesting finding because there's an oppositional theory that suggests that people who live alone tend to be more socially isolated or antisocial, and then that can become a problem. And we'll talk about this here in a minute, but that's actually the subject of a book by Robert Putnam, who is a professor at Harvard. It's called Bowling Alone, where he suggested that social capital in America and other advanced industrial societies was causing a death of civic participation, and that this was helping to create a sense of deterioration among society and social networks in general. But back to the notes here. So in the article as well, a few other findings here. The article connected an increase in single living to modernization and cultural change, and noted that India, China, and Brazil were the nations that had the highest increases in people living alone over the past decade, and proposing that that was part of financial independence that was going on in some of these countries, as well as cultural shifts from living more in an extended family to a single family environment. Ideas of individualism, self-sufficiency, privacy, these are all very important. And are a part of modernization, cultural change. The author also showed these people who lived alone, in the United States at least, to be more social even though they use the internet a lot. And instead of isolating these singles, the internet and social media keeps them more connected than singles 10 or 20 years ago. Now to explain that a little bit more, what they're trying to suggest here is there's two sides to this theory. One, that people who use the internet would be less social and will cut themselves off and play video games. But as you know, video games themselves have a social component to it, multiplayer games. And the other side of that is that the internet actually helps people become more connected. And that seems to be the theory that is supported by the data. And that's the point here about using the census, GSS, and this author's own research. The conclusions here: use multiple data. That increases the reliability of your finding and verification as well. Data can be used to lead you to more questions. So every study, as many questions as it answers, it poses that many for future research. Correlations as well, and cultural change is constantly occurring, and this study may show something different next time, meaning that you may have a decrease in people living alone. You may have an increase in it, and an increase of social interaction as well. That also goes with a general trend of people waiting longer to get married and more people not getting married at all. So before, and I want you to make sure to look at the map on the left side of the screen, and I'll show you this in the article, to explore where in the country. This is similar to the Social Explorer website I showed you, where it takes census data and turns it into a geographic map. And that allows you to look at, if you want to look at Cleveland or if you want to look at New York, and it shows you the percentage of people living alone. We looked at that with race and poverty and unemployment. So make sure you do that. And I'll show you later how to use Google Street View to look at some of these neighborhoods in a more microscopic way and get down to the street level and see what do these neighborhoods look like that have 75% of the people that are living in single dwellings with one individual in them. So let's go to the article here. So this is an article on New York Times. And again, you see what some of the things I was talking about. Here is their connection to modern values, where it says 3 of the nations with the fastest growing populations of single people, China, India, and Brazil, are also among those with the fastest growing economies. They also talk about how cultural definitions have changed. That living alone used to spark anxiety or fear or a stigma, that there was something wrong with you. That's no longer the case. And with personal and home security devices, and with less violent crime on the streets, it is much more viable to live alone, and the privacy factor is a big element of that. Privacy is really a very modern value system developed in urban settings, because in rural settings you had privacy inherent. So privacy now means living by yourself, especially in urban settings. So you see this as well. We go on to talk about, here's the general social survey they mentioned. And they talk about a sociologist at Cornell analyzed results. And he found that people that were single and older tended to be more socially connected. And even published the article in an American Sociological Review. Said that single seniors had the same number of friends and core discussion partners as their married peers and were more likely to socialize with friends and neighbors, which is a big finding, and again is against one of the other hypotheses, or the opposing hypothesis, that people who live alone would be more antisocial. Then he goes on to talk about survey data. Okay, up here, he talked about his interviews. Then here is a general social survey. Here's another survey done by market research companies, and you can read what that was about. Here's a Pew Internet Personal Networks and Community Survey, and this was 2,500 American adults, and this was at Social Isolation and New Technology. And it says here, reveals heavy users of internet technology are more likely than others to have large and diverse social networks, more likely to visit parks, cafes, restaurants, more likely to meet diverse people with different perspectives and beliefs. But it's hard to tell whether or not that's a factor that they live in urban areas and that's just the way they operate, or people who use these tend to be upper middle class and would have a larger social network anyway. It deserves a more intense investigation and future research. You can also go to the Pew Internet Personal Networks and Community Survey. We will talk about that later in our internet section and look more at the data and research that's been done. Here's where it talks about how the number has gone up. They asked some of the people the reason why they lived alone, and one of the things they said was they had found there was nothing worse than living with the wrong person. And that either means marriage or cohabitation or a family member or a roommate or whatever it is. Here's one interview. He's talking about his interviews again, where older single people expressed a clear presence for living alone, which allowed them to retain their feelings of independence and integrity, and a clear aversion to moving in with friends or family or into a nursing home. Here's another one where the author quotes, according to research by Rutgers sociologist Deborah Carr. It talks about the death of a spouse and how that impacts people's behavior. Here's another one by UCLA economist Kathleen McGarry, talking about other aspects of living alone. So it is quite a good author, and this is from Eric Kleinenberg, and he's a professor of sociology at New York University, and he wrote a book on the subject, so you can even look that up. And I've actually seen Eric at a presentation at an Eastern Sociological Society, and he was working on a book there as well on media. And this goes against what Robert Putnam was saying in his book Bowling Alone, where he says, Putnam warns that our stock of social capital, the very fabric of our connections with each other, has plummeted, impoverishing our lives and communities, and he used 500,000 interviews over the last quarter of a century to show that people sign fewer petitions, belong to fewer organizations that meet, know their neighbors less, meet with friends less frequently, and even socialize with our families less often, or even bowling alone. More Americans are bowling than ever before, but they're not bowling in leagues. I don't know exactly if he's ever been to Cleveland Bowling Alley or in Columbus, but every time I go there, it's always league night and it's filled with people. So maybe this needs to be updated a little bit more. Maybe it's in certain regions of the country. A lot of people have challenged what Robert Putnam's saying here. I think clearly Eric Kleinenberg is saying that that's not necessarily the case. This also pertains to one of the essay questions or project questions on your test, where I'm asking you about trust in neighbors and natural disasters and designing a survey for that, so make sure to look over that. So, if anybody has any questions about that, you can email me about about that, and you can look up Bowling Alone, just put it in, and Robert Putnam's site comes up. You can actually go to his site in Harvard, and he's got his articles as well. You can also go here and look up articles. This is Google Scholar. And you can look up Putnam, Robert, and it comes right up. Bowling Alone. And here's his article on it. And he published this in the Journal of Democracy. Now, I want to go back and show you this map. Go back to Eric Kleineberg's article and show you this. If you scroll down here, this is one of the great things about some of these new internet news sites. They have these great links to articles, and they do charts for you. So here's charts about solo in America. Here's people, and this is comparing other nations to the United States. And here's what I want you to click on and go to. This is based on the 2010 census, and it's similar to the Social Explorer data we were looking at. And here is New York City, and I will pan out and show you Cleveland. This is the percentage of people living alone, and the darker it is, the more people are living by themselves. So let's go over to Cleveland. So here's Cleveland, and you see, out of Ohio, Cleveland has one of the highest percentages. And you notice in rural areas, it actually has some of the lowest areas of people living by themselves, which also ties into the marriage rate. You can see in Columbus, here's the university. If you click on this, you can, I don't know how well that's showing up on the camera, but if you can see here, this is where the university is, and it's over 68%, 46% people living by themselves. You can see it here pretty clearly. Let me zoom in a little bit more. So here's the university right here. 68%, 52%, 55%. All right, let's pan out, and I'll show you Cleveland. And you notice Cuyahoga County is completely in the dark blue, which means over 40% of the people in the entire county live by themselves. You see here, it's actually 35%, so sorry. But if you see here, we will zoom in, and you'll see where we're at. And what you can do, and you can take this and you go to Google, and open Google Maps, and you can find an area in the city. For example, here, this is near Berea. Here's Berea. It's got 42%, 40%. Part of that has got to do with college age students in the area. 54% here for Olmsted, Falls. You see up in the center city, 72% here. You can go to Google Maps. I'm not going to do it now. I'll do it in class later. You can go to Google Maps and click on this, and you can see as you go in even further the detail here. And you can see what this area looks like. Are there a lot of apartments there? Are there a lot of single-family housing? Is there, is it a high poverty area, a low poverty area? Is there a lot of young people that live there? And you can overlay this data with the data from the Social Explorer and change it around. This one is primarily connected to the article, so they just did percentage of single people living alone. But it's fascinating, and I'll show you in class because it's better to see it here. But if you go on Google Maps, I'll show you how to do this though. If you go on Google Maps, you can go what's called Street View. Some of you have probably already done this, but all you have to do, I guess it's already up there, so I'll show you here. So we'll go down to the one area I showed you. That had a high level of people living by themselves. So it was right around here, just near the other airport. So it's right in here. So if we take this and we put this guy here, it'll show you the street view of where that is. It should. There we go. And you can see. And you can move it around and see what's on the side. You can change the angle. You can use it over here. And you can see here, there's a lot of shops here. And one of the reasons why there's so many single people is that this is more of a business area. But again, one of the things you can see is you can take the poverty map we used and go into neighborhoods at high levels of poverty and see what they look like. And you can see boarded up buildings and things. We'll talk more about this later, and it's one of the areas that's growing in sociology, about the geography of sociology, the geography of poverty, using these interactive maps, Google Street View, with Social Explorer, with the census data to create a composite picture, really sort of almost a three-dimensional picture of what things look like. You know, you can even go down the street a little bit with this. Some of you have already used this, but again, you can see this stuff pretty clearly. Anyway, so go on and explore that and take a look at that. All right, now let's go to the article. I'm not going to talk necessarily about the article on health insurance. Make sure to look over that. Make sure to look at that for definitions, how they came up with their calculations, what data they used. So I think it's interesting from that perspective, and then also just from a general informative perspective. But I want to focus primarily here on the data found and findings found in the article off the census data that discuss lifetime earnings, because I think it's instructive not only to understand how the economy is changing and some of the differences that exist now in what we call a post-industrial or tech-based economy, information-based economy, and the industrial economy, which was more about manufacturing jobs and other things that only took many times a high school diploma, and nowadays most of the time a bachelor's degree isn't even enough. But one of the things they looked at in this article specifically was what paid the most when it came to bachelor's degree, not only what degree you had, but how that combined with occupation. So I want to go over a few of the main points here, and then we'll talk about the article itself, and then that'll wrap up the class as well. I had some other things on the census. I'll send you a link for it. I broke down ethnicity in the United States, and I wanted not only to look at that, show you that for an example of the census data, but also to set up my class on racial and cultural minorities, which, by the way, I've already got the books for, and I can show you some of the things that I have there if anybody's interested in taking that class in the spring. So let's go over this stuff. I'll show you some of the things in the article, how to read some of these charts, and then that'll be it for the class for today. And then I'll post Friday's class up either Thursday night or Friday, and you can make sure to do the reading. That will be on the ISSP article on environmental values, and pay attention to the terms post-materialist values. That's a very important concept that came out of the ISSP data, so make sure you know about that before you not only look over that in the reading, but know what that means before you watch the class that I'm going to put online on YouTube. So let's go to this article. Now, this mainly used data from the census. We'll talk about all the data and where they got it from. But again, not surprisingly, engineering and high-tech jobs lead the list with over $3 million in lifetime earnings. No matter what the degree. So even if you had a degree in literature or liberal arts or management or business, if you went into a firm or a job or something that did something technical like computer analyst or engineer, or working for an engineering company or a computer-based company or some biotech firm, you were much more likely to make money, even more money, than even if you only had a degree in something where you normally would need a master's degree, like literature, liberal arts, business, and several other things. Even those with degrees in liberal arts and literature had high lifetime earnings if they were able to land a job in engineering and or computer technology. We'll come back to that when I look at the actual article with you. However, even someone with an engineering degree, but they went into a teaching or a service job position, their lifetime earnings were below $2 million, and we'll look at that there. So, which is not much, and we'll look at how they calculated lifetime earnings. So it's basically sort of synthetic lifetime earnings, which we'll talk about what that means. Those with a non-science degree and a non-science and tech job have even lower lifetime earnings potential, and that means if you have a degree in liberal arts or literature and you have a job in a service position like a food service job or a hotel service job or even a teaching position, your lifetime earnings many times was below $2 million. Make sure to see the section on how the data was collected and what, if any, limitations it has. Friday class will be up by 2 p.m. or Friday or sooner. Look over the second test as well and email me. Now, for the last part, and I will put those notes up online. Speaking of ethnicity, that's the Welsh flag. But here is the article on work-life earnings by degree and occupation. And that's what's clever, I think. One of the things that's clever about this article is that not only looking at what job you have, what degree you have. Did you have an engineering job but you worked at a service job? Or reverse, did you have a literature degree but you worked at a high-tech firm? And these are the things that matters. And these, you know, when we break these things down with these variables, these sub-variables, we're getting more into the detailed, nuanced, sophisticated view of what the data says, and therefore we can test more sophisticated theories about why these things take place. And how they're related to economic change. And you see this even in the introduction as well. Now, I want to talk about how they calculated this. So they talk about this here. Let me make it bigger. This is how they calculated the synthetic work-life estimates. They took the median earnings for each group. They multiplied the earnings for each group by the number of years in that group. They represent the amount of money earned in that stage of life. So they take into account things like promotions and increases in salary and how much time they have left or how much time it would take for them to retire. They add the totals together, which probably would change based on Social Security. Add to the totals together to represent 40 years of earnings. Repeat for every occupation of education and level, education level and occupation group. So, what did they find? So, and you see here as well, they tell you where they got this from. This is from the American Community Survey, and it says educational attainment is by far the most important social characteristic for predicting earnings. The report uses 2011 AACS data to create the synthetic lifetime earnings table. One shows how earnings increase as educational attainment increases. Synthetic earnings estimates based on educational attainment alone range from less than 1 million for those with the lowest education to about 4 million for those with a professional degree. The difference in work-life earnings between workers in a high school diploma and those with a college degree is about 1 million. And that's growing greater as we go along, and more manufacturing jobs that are low-skilled, low education go away. And the difference between the estimates for workers with a college degree and estimates those with a doctorate degree is another 1 million. So you can see why people are willing to spend a lot of money to go get a doctoral degree. But let's look at the chart. And this is in millions of dollars. And you see for all majors and all occupations it's 2.4. I'll make this bigger. And I want to show a few things here. One, the people who have degrees in computer and math have a high of over $2 million in lifetime earnings until they become either educators, office support, or service. And somebody with that type of degree probably wouldn't go into that job. When they go into management, they make $3.7 million in lifetime earnings. And you can see as well science and engineering fields up at the top. Even business, if you go into agricultural engineering or architecture and engineering, computer math, management, business and finance, any of these degrees has a high level of earnings when you look at these. But if you see engineering goes all the way down, that even in community service and legal, production, transportation and material moving, arts and media, and other than in the service and education, those with these engineering degrees perform at a much higher level and make a much larger base salary. Look at the social scientists here on the right side. Social scientists who know computer and math skills earn $3.2 million. Those that are in management, $3.4. Those that go into education, only $1.9 million. So you see the difference in there. And these are predominantly for-profit businesses and organizations that these people are working for. Now, let's go down a little bit further, and you see them include degrees like liberal arts, So here's communications, biological sciences, literature, liberal arts, psychology, arts, education. You notice education has the lowest among the average of all occupations. But let's take literature for example. Somebody who's in literature that gets a job in computer and math earns $2.9 million. If they get a job in management, 2.8. Arts and media, 2.4. Business and finance, 2.5. But if they're in a service position, office support, education, or even natural resources or production and transportation, lower than 2 million. Similar phenomenon with liberal arts and arts as well. And arts make even lower. Among the jobs, arts has the lowest aggregate total amount, 1.3 in a service job for somebody who has an arts degree. But if they have an art degree and they're in a computer and math or an architecture and engineering job, they make nearly as much as some of the other ones who have more advanced degrees in engineering or degrees in engineering. Notice in psychology, if someone's in engineering and psychology, they make almost as much as somebody who has, they make more than somebody who has a biological sciences degree, and they make almost as much as people who have computer and math degrees and science and engineering degrees. So psychology is one of the degrees that has a high lifetime salary if you can get into one of these computer math jobs or management jobs. So keep that in mind. Keep those keys in mind when you're trying to choose. When you're trying to choose a major and you're trying to choose a profession, and choose wisely. Or for as expensive as school is, you can't take the chance of making a mistake and having to go back to school or 2 or 3 years because you need to retake classes. So that's all we have for today, other than to talk about some of the sourcing here. So I want to go over this briefly, and then that will be it for the class. And if anybody has any questions or anything, just email me. And then remember as well, I'll send you a link for this, the ethnic makeup of the United States. And then make sure to look over the second test. So where they got this data, they show this here. And here's the website. The American Community Survey is a nationwide survey designed to provide communities with reliable and timely demographic, social, economic, and housing data for the nation, states, congressional districts, counties, places, and other localities every year. So this is a yearly survey instead of the census, which is every 10 years, which makes it a little more reliable, and you can see change over time. It has an annual sample size of 3.3 million, so much better than Gallup or even the General Social Survey. And it addresses across the United States and Puerto Rico, and includes both housing units and group quarters. And that means nursing facilities and prisons. So this looks at things that sometimes the census gets to, but the GSS certainly does not. The ACS is conducted in every county throughout the nation and every municipal area in Puerto Rico, where it is called the Puerto Rico Community Survey. Beginning in 2006, ACS data for 2005 were released for geographic areas and populations of 65,000 and greater. For information on ACS sample design and other topics, you can visit their website. So that's all I have for today. I will put up the other class at about no later than 2 p.m. on Friday, and make sure to do the reading on the ISSP and environmental data that I put online. So I'll talk to you later, and see you.